There's too much on my mind. There's too much on my mind. And I can't sleep at night thinking about it. I'm thinking all the time. There's too much on my mind. It seems there's more to life than just to live it. There's too much on my mind, and there is nothing I can say. There's too much on my mind, and there is nothing I can do about it. About it. My thoughts just weigh me down and drag me to the ground and shake my head till there's no more life in me. It's ruining my brain. I'll never be the
The ancient Greek physician Hippocrates is considered one of the most outstanding figures in the history of medicine, and commonly referred to as the father of Western medicine. Hippocrates is credited with being the first Western doctor to believe that diseases were caused naturally, not derived from gods or superstition. Hippocratic medicine was notable for its strict professionalism, discipline, and rigorous practice, and the Hippocratic school was the first to identify the importance of observation and documentation. A seminal document in the ethics of medical practice, the Hippocratic Oath is probably the most famous document from Hippocratic corpus. The oath is historically taken by physicians and physician assistants. It is perhaps the most widely known of all Greek medical texts. In addition to containing information on medical matters, the collection had a code of principles, including the earliest known for patient-doctor confidentiality.
Whatever, in connection with my professional service, or not in connection with it, I see or hear in the life of men, which ought not to be spoken of abroad, I will not divulge, as reckoning that all such should be kept secret. While I continue to keep this oath unviolated, may it be granted to me to enjoy life and the practice of the art, respected by all men in all times. But should I trespass and violate this oath, may the reverse be my lot.
That's better. Okay, now listen, the three of us are gonna work this out, yeah? How? First things first, you're gonna put $1 in my pocket, both of you. You want attorney-client privilege, don't you? So that everything you say is strictly between us. I mean it. Put $1 in my pocket. Come on, make it official. Come on, do it. That's it, come on. Just $1. Go ahead. All right, now you, ski bum. Come on, give with $1. Oh, be smart. What?
I got you 5.
I'll take a 5. Come on already, come on. Be cool. Okay, you're now both officially represented by Saul Goodman and Associates. Your secrets are safe with me under threat of disbarment. All right? Take the ski mask off. I feel like I'm talking to the Weather Underground here.
Just do it.
Okay, so if a prison shanking is completely off the table, and we're sure of that,
No shaking!
All right. And the way I see it is, somebody's going to prison. It's just a matter of who.
Your lawyer called and said he had the papers all prepared. To sign my name was all I had to do.
Lawyers are required by law to keep confidential anything pertaining to the representation of a client. The duty of confidentiality is much broader than the attorney-client privilege, which only covers communications between attorney and client.
Will your lawyer talk to God and plead your case up on high and defend the way you broke my heart in two?
Legal confidentiality serves the purpose of encouraging clients to speak frankly about their cases. This way, lawyers will be able to carry out their duty effectively. However, most jurisdictions have exceptions for situations where the lawyer has reason to believe the client may kill or seriously injure someone, cause substantial injury to a financial interest or property, or is using the lawyer's services to perpetrate a crime.
When your time comes, I wonder what you'll do. Will you bow your head in shame, or will you turn your head away, or will your lawyer talk to God for you? Will your lawyer talk to God and plead your case upon?
When you see everything...
A white knight for democracy or a defector to the dark side. The American at the center of his country's biggest ever confidentiality controversy, Edward Snowden, insisted he went public about his country's program to spy on ordinary citizens because his conscience got the better of him.
If I had just wanted to harm the U.S., you know, that you could shut down the surveillance system in an afternoon. But that's not my intention. And I think for anyone making that argument, they need to think, if they were in my position, and you know, you live a privileged life, you're living in Hawaii, in paradise, and making a ton of money, what would it take to make you leave everything behind?
The Booz Allen Hamilton Holding Corporation, subcontracted to the National Security Agency, paid Snowden a salary of $122,000 per year. He is said to have handled information classified as secret about ways to use the internet and telecommunications systems to collect data which would be stored indefinitely. Carrying supportive evidence, he left Hawaii for Hong Kong without even telling his fiancée on the 20th of May. Once in China, he told his story to the Washington Post and the Guardian newspapers. He hid at the Hotel Mirror for 3 weeks, then moved furtively to an apartment or more than one. After he came forward by name as the source of the revelations, he was afraid he would end up held in a Hong Kong jail. It has an extradition treaty with the United States. So he negotiated a deal with the Chinese. American officials said they did not know how much sensitive material Snowden had. A lawyer alludes to the sensitivity of the arrangement.
Information was passed to Snowden through this middle person, this carer, that he was asked to leave Hong Kong. And he was given assurance that he could leave Hong Kong without being stopped in the airport.
Sarah Harrison of the online disclosure organization WikiLeaks accompanied him. He flew commercial Aeroflot to Moscow Sunday, perhaps not going through airport passport control. An airport source said he'd been booked on a flight to Cuba on Monday but did not board. WikiLeaks said Snowden is traveling on a refugee document of passage provided by Ecuador, which has no extradition treaty with the US.
One, two, 1, 2, 1, 2, my dog. It's bigger than hip hop, hip hop, hip hop, hip. It's bigger than hip hop, hip hop, hip hop, hip hop.
Both the ACA and APA have codes and standards for confidentiality and privacy that counselors must recognize to help establish trust in a client-counselor relationship. Counselors must also communicate the parameters of confidentiality in a culturally competent manner. Trust is the cornerstone in any counseling relationship, and respecting client rights is mandatory if you hope to build a productive relationship with a client. Counselors must respect the privacy of both prospective and current clients. Counselors must request private information from clients only when it is beneficial to the counseling process. Many times, a client isn't ready to disclose, and it is not the counselor's job to determine when and to whom a client should share. Counselors must always protect confidential information of prospective and current clients. Counselors disclose information only with appropriate consent or with sound legal or ethical justification. According to the APA, psychologists have a primary obligation to take reasonable precautions to protect confidential information stored in any medium. So if you're a note taker, make sure not to leave your client notes scattered around the office. That's not only an APA and ACA no-no, but it fails to show the proper respect for privacy that each client deserves. A very important code is that of explanation of limitations. Whether cognizant of it or not, most of us have seen an example of this in either a movie or a TV show. At the start of the counseling process, counselors inform clients of limitations of confidentiality and seek to identify situations in which confidentiality must be breached. In this next clip, we observe a therapist explain these limitations to a client who she believes may have a history with crime and violence.
Finish telling me about the day you collapsed.
I drove to work with my nephew, Christopher. He's learning the business. Now, he's an example of what I was talking about before. Did you call, what's his name down at Tribal Towers about the Holland contract?
I got home too late last night. I didn't want to wake the man up.
Did you get up early this morning and call? He's always in his office by 6.
I was nauseous this morning. My mother told me I shouldn't even come in today.
Bear in mind, this is a kid who just bought himself a $60,000 Lexus.
Who's that guy, Mahaffey?
Get out.
Yeah, right there, next to the boo-boo in pink. Back up.
My friend Mahaffey, born as Taffy.
Hello.
We saw this guy, and there was this issue of an outstanding loan.
Can I stop you for a second? I don't know where this story is going, but there are a few ethical ground rules we should quickly get out of the way. What you tell me here falls under doctor-patient confidentiality. Except if I was to hear, let's say, a murder was to take place. Not that I'm saying it would, but if a patient comes to me and tells me a story where someone's going to get hurt, I'm supposed to go to the authorities. Technically. You said you were in waste management.
The environment.
Dr. Cusimano, besides being your family physician, is also your next-door neighbor. See what I'm saying? I don't know what happened with this fellow. I'm just saying.
Nothing. We had coffee.
Exceptions to confidentiality and privacy are important to know in times when you might struggle with whether or not a client or someone close to the client may be harmed because of a foreseeable action. Counselors who provide services to terminally ill individuals who are considering ending their own lives have the option to maintain confidentiality. This, of course, is dependent on applicable laws and the specific circumstances of the situation. It is also recommended that counselors seek consultation or supervision from appropriate professional and legal parties. Another exception to client confidentiality and privacy can occur when a client discloses that they have a transmittable disease that is also life-threatening. Counselors may be justified in disclosing information to identifiable third parties if the parties are known to be at serious and foreseeable risk of contracting the disease. Before disclosing, the counselor must assess the intent of a client to inform the third party. If it appears that the client is not going to disclose and a third party is in danger, the counselor is advised to break the confidentiality code between counselor and client to protect the welfare of another. Yet another possible exception to client confidentiality would be court-ordered disclosure. When ordered by a court to release confidential information about a client and without a client's permission, counselors will first seek to obtain written consent from the client to prohibit the disclosure or have it limited as narrowly as possible. A request for health information without a client's permission can be an example of a court-ordered disclosure. In this instance, the counselor can compel the court to reconsider because of potential harm to the client-counselor relationship. In some cases, a counselor may also be able to disclose confidential client information as a part of the defense against a civil, criminal, or disciplinary action. Another exception to privacy and confidentiality would be under the field of serious and foreseeable harm and legal requirements. We've all seen multiple examples either through books, movies, or TV shows. The general requirement that counselors keep information confidential does not apply when disclosure is required to protect clients or identified others from serious and foreseeable harm, or when legal requirements demand that confidential information must be revealed. Once again, it is highly recommended that counselors consult with other professionals when in doubt as to the validity of an exception. The following clip will provide an example to this exception. Although highly fictionalized, try to imagine yourself as the counselor. Do you agree with his methods? Do you disagree? If so, what would you do differently?
Conflicted. I mean, I don't know if I really want to go. It's in Detroit, and I grew up there, but I just honestly don't know what I have in common with those people anymore. I mean, or with anyone, really. I mean, they'll all have husbands and wives and children and houses and dogs, and, you know, they'll make themselves a part of something, and they can talk about what they do, and what am I going to say? I killed the president of Paraguay with a fork. How have you been? I'm just thinking it'll be depressing. It'll be depressing. Shouldn't you be taking notes or something?
I'm not taking notes, Martin, because I'm not your doctor.
Please don't start with that stuff again.
Martin, I'm emotionally involved with you.
How are you emotionally involved with me?
I'm afraid of you.
You're afraid of me.
And that constitutes an emotional involvement, and it would be unethical for me to work with you under those circumstances.
Don't you think maybe you're just upset because I told you what I do for a living and you got upset and you're letting it interfere with our dynamic?
Whoa. Martin, you didn't tell me what you did for a living.
Yes, I did.
You didn't tell me what you did for a living for 4 sessions. Then you told me. And I said, I don't want to work with you. And yet you come back every week at the same time. That's a difficulty for me. On top of that, if you've committed a crime or if you're thinking about committing a crime, I have to tell the authorities.
I know the law, okay? But I don't want to be withholding. I'm very serious about this process. And I know where you live.
Oh, now see, that wasn't a nice thing to say. That wasn't designed to make me feel good. That's a kind of a not too subtle intimidation, and I get filled with anxiety when you talk about something like that. I mean, that's...
I was just kidding, all right? The thought never crossed my mind.
You did think of it, Martin. You thought of it, and then you said it. And now I'm left with the aftermath of that, thinking I gotta be creative in a really interesting way now, or Martin's gonna blow my brains out. You're holding me hostage.
The ACA and APA also places a high importance on information shared with others. First, let's talk about subordinates. Counselors make every effort to ensure that privacy and confidentiality of clients are maintained by subordinates, including employees, supervisors, students, clerical assistants, and volunteers. For example, I work at a higher education setting. Hence, it is not just the counselor's job, but it is the job of the team to ensure that privacy and confidentiality are being taken care of. Next, let's touch on interdisciplinary teams. According to the ACA, when services provided to the client involve participation by an interdisciplinary or treatment team, the client will be informed of the team's existence and composition, information being shared, and the purposes of sharing such information. Once again, working in a higher education setting, sometimes I'll work with different organizations on campus. If I'm working with this organization with regards to a client I'm serving, it is my responsibility to inform the client of which organization I am working with and ensure that their privacy and confidentiality is being secured. Furthermore, if a counselor is to work with an outside organization or even another organization on campus, counselors need to discuss confidential information only in settings in which they can reasonably ensure client privacy. Additionally, counselors must disclose information to third-party payers only when clients have authorized such disclosure. In a nutshell, if you're going to work with somebody outside of the counselor-client circle, you must first speak to your client about it, get their authorization, and also secure his or her privacy and confidentiality. Working with groups and families can sometimes be a slippery slope when considering confidentiality and privacy. According to the ACA, in group work, counselors clearly explain the importance and parameters of confidentiality for the specific group. Hence, the group leader and all group members share responsibility for confidentiality. Each group member must sign an agreement to adhere to the rules of confidentiality and/or privacy. Group members pledge that they will never share group business, including names of other group members outside of the group. Confidentiality is critical to the development of a safe, respectful, and trusting atmosphere in which individuals share their feelings openly. Confidentiality exists when providing couples or group therapy, but there are differences from the confidentiality that exists in individual evaluation and treatment settings. In couples and family counseling, counselors clearly define who is considered the client and discuss expectations and limitations of confidentiality. The information that is revealed within a setting where there is more than one individual present is usually available to all the individuals who are present. Any one of the individuals present may seek copies of the records of these couples or group sessions, or may release all the records of these sessions to an outside party. When individuals in the group or couples therapy are seen on a one-on-one basis, apart from the joint sessions, these communications are commonly treated as typical one-to-one evaluation or treatment sessions, unless there is a prior agreement that the content of such sessions should be available to the group. To protect the patients, clients of group and couples evaluation or treatment, therapists and psychologists should inform their patient clients of the limits of confidentiality and make a note of this in the record of the group or couple session. The APA and ACA also have a firm set of standards and codes for those clients lacking the capacity to give informed consent. As counselors, we must first think of our responsibility to these clients. When counseling minor clients or adult clients who lack this capacity to give voluntary informed consent, counselors must protect the confidentiality of information received. And this includes information that's received in any medium, be it phone, email, or conversation. With regards to our responsibility to parents and legal guardians, the APA says counselors inform parents and legal guardians about the role of counselors and the confidential nature of the counseling relationship, coexistent with current legal and custodial arrangements. When students enter into a counseling relationship with their school counselor, the school counselor will educate the student about the purposes, goals, techniques, and rules of procedure under which they may receive counseling. This disclosure notice, which a school counselor will explain in terms appropriate to the student's age and cognitive ability, addresses the limits of confidentiality, such as the possible need to consult with other professionals, privileged communication, and legal or authoritative restraints. The school counselor and parents need to build a relationship of mutual respect and trust to make the best decisions about the child. Trust means that what is shared is confidential and related to the child. The relationship between parent and school counselor develops through working together. With a primary obligation to the student, confidentiality is balanced with an understanding of the parents' legal and inherent rights to be the guiding voice in their children's lives. The following clip will provide an example of a counselor working with a client's parents to inform them of the client's situation and what they can do to help.
Thank you for seeing us at such late notice. We both felt that it was time for us to come in and discuss
what I think is going on with your son.
Yes. Well, he's, you know about his past, and he was suspended from school for insulting his gym teacher.
Well, I'm not really sure that's a good example, Rose. I think he had just caused insult.
Rose, let me just lay out what I believe is happening here. Donnie's aggressive behavior, his increased detachment from reality, seemed to stem from his inability to cope with the forces in the world that he perceives to be threatening. Has he ever told you about his friend Frank?
Frank?
Yes, the giant bunny rabbit.
What?
I don't recall him ever having mentioned a rabbit.
Donnie is experiencing what is commonly called a daylight hallucination. This is a common occurrence among paranoid schizophrenics.
What can we do?
I would like to do more hypnotherapy and increase his medication. Whatever will help you,
Really, that's why we're here. We just would like him to experience some relief. So, if you think that more medication will do that, then I think we should give it a try.
Records and documentation is very important when considering client confidentiality and privacy. Counselors create and maintain records and documentation necessary for rendering professional services. Also, counselors ensure that records and documentation kept in any medium are secure and that only authorized persons have access to them. For example, within the CMHC on campus, your counseling record is available to staff records who have a need to access them. Yet your counseling record is not part of your academic record. If you choose to authorize release of your counseling record to an academic department, that information does become part of your academic record. It is important to remember that counselors must obtain permission from clients prior to recording sessions through electronic or other means. Counselors must also obtain permission from clients prior to allowing any person to observe counseling sessions, review session transcripts, or view recordings of sessions with supervisors, faculty, peers, or others within the training environment. For many of us who are in our first year of practicum, we've actually experienced this firsthand within the last couple of weeks. Any time that we went in for observation, our supervisor first had to ask the client if they had their permission for us to sit in on their session. Counselors also must provide reasonable access to records and copies of records when requested by competent clients. A client may request his or her own records in most situations. Some facilities may require a meeting of attending counselors to determine if all or parts of the client's record should be released to him or her. The decision not to release all or parts of the record to a client may be made if the client is not emotionally and mentally stable enough to cope with the information on the chart. Additionally, counselors must provide assistance with records. When clients request access to their records, counselors must provide assistance and consultation in interpreting counseling records. We've touched on how you can maintain confidentiality and privacy when taking records. It's just as important to maintain confidentiality when storing and disposing of records as well. Counselors store records following termination of services to ensure reasonable future access. Additionally, therapists maintain client treatment records for a reasonable amount of time consistent with state regulations. Records are stored or disposed of in ways that maintain confidentiality. Counselors must apply careful discretion and deliberation before destroying records that may be needed by a court of law, such as notes on child abuse, suicide, sexual harassment, or violence. Under ACA codes for case consultation, we see respect for privacy and disclosure of confidential information. Yes, they're separate, but in truth they go hand in hand. The codes state, information shared in a counseling relationship is discussed for professional purposes only. Written and oral reports present only data germane to the purposes of the consultation, and every effort is made to protect client identity and to avoid undue invasion of privacy. Likewise, when speaking of disclosure of confidential information, consulting with colleagues, counselors do not disclose confidential information that reasonably could lead to the identification of a client or other person or organization with whom they have a confidential relationship. Once again, the emphasis is on confidentiality here. Whether you're in a counseling session one-on-one with your client, or in a group, or sitting with your colleagues.
Confidentiality is one of the main ethical considerations for school counselors. How do we maintain students' trust, but still do what we can to keep students safe and parents informed? How do laws and co-ethics coexist? Confidentiality is a professional's promise or contract to respect clients' privacy by not disclosing anything revealed during counseling except under agreed upon conditions. When it comes to student privacy and confidentiality in the school records, there's a lot of data that is confidential. Personal info such as their address and phone number for sure, along with their parent or sibling information. Also things like social security number, their student ID, their grades for courses, their GPA and rank can't be shared, STAR test scores, SAT scores, PSAT scores, and the rest. When sharing information with the students, you have to be careful. For example, when the students took the Algebra 1 EOC, I had to be careful to share the scores with the students, let them know whether they passed, without letting their friends know who passed and who didn't pass. So things have to be taken very carefully. You want to make sure that you share the information in a private way, and so as not to upset the students and bringing out to attention who didn't do well on the STAR test. Other things such as GPA and rank, when that comes out, it's a very sensitive information. So you have to find a way of sharing the information without drawing attention to students who might be sad or disappointed or excited about their rank in such a private way. Other things that are important are sharing information with other teachers. A lot of times it's on an as need to know basis. That's really important with sharing STAR test scores. They might need Algebra 1 tutoring, but you don't want all the teachers in the math department, they don't all need to know which kids are in the Algebra 1 tutoring for not passing the STAR the first time. So different things come into factors when choosing confidentiality of who to share and who not to. Some confidential info that's shared with teachers is a need-to-know basis. Teachers that have a student that is in the SPED program or the 504 program often need information to help them provide accommodations or modifications to instruction for students. That information is provided on a need-to-know basis to all teachers that have access with the instruction for those students. That information is very important and privy. It's required by law to have meetings at the beginning of the year to share confidentiality about SPED and 504 students. When you're sending emails, you need to be very careful how you word those emails and referencing children that involved to ensure confidentiality in case someone else was to read the email. Other information that if a student is transferred to another class or the student leaves and moves in the middle of the year, or in fact if the student actually just at the end of the year, that any information provided for a student about tests concerning SPED or 504, that information must be shredded in order to ensure confidentiality for the student. Medical records, immunizations, medications, things like that that are for students that might be diabetic or have ADHD and have to take medications for that. Again, that information is only provided to teachers that are in direct contact with those students to help provide privacy for those students and any kind of conditions that they may not be wanting to share. Parent contact information is also private. Parents have to release records to allow any of that stuff to be shared. In most cases, the parents share it with all their teachers, but that you're not supposed to be sending an email list with everybody's parent information and student information on it. That would get you into big trouble, so don't do that. So there's different kinds of school confidentiality things that come up. There's a difference between confidentiality and legal privilege. There's confidentiality for minors. There's parental consent, school counselors, client relationship, and it's not just limited to confidentiality for school counselors. Some of the differences, what exactly is confidentiality and how is it different from a legal privilege? Confidentiality is a professional's promise or contract to respect client's privacy by not disclosing anything revealed during counseling, except under agreed upon conditions. Legal privilege is different. While confidentiality in school counseling is an ethical term, legal privilege is obviously an illegal term. Whenever there's a struggle between ethics and the law always prevails. Legal privilege is given to attorneys, doctors, and licensed professional counselors, among others, but in many states, school counselors are certified rather than licensed, so legal privilege doesn't apply. Like as a counselor, as a high school counselor, I would be certified rather than licensed. So that's what you need to take that into account. Confidentiality for minors. So what does that mean? Is there really no such thing as confidentiality for minor students? And how does this differ for minors, parents of minors, and adults in general? So there is still such a thing as confidentiality for minors, but there are certain legal exceptions that must be considered. For instance, when it comes to informed consent, such as consent for the student to see the counselor or consent for a student to join a school support group, FERPA laws say that until a student is 18, the parents have the right to give or deny consent. So, can a school see a minor student without parental consent? Yes, a parent can specifically forbid a minor student to see the school counselor or specifically forbid the counselor to work with a minor student. But as long as the parent hasn't stated that specifically, school counseling is considered a regular educational service provided by the school. So legally, the counselor can see a minor student without parent consent. Who is actually the school's counselor's client? The minor student or the parents? Even with the legal issues involved, from an ethical standpoint, the school counselor's client is the student. This is one of the first things discussed in the ethical standards for school counselors. The parents' needs are considered, but the needs of the students come first above all others. School counselors are part of an educational community, and as such, they consult with teachers, administrators, and parents. And it's important for school counselors to clarify that their consultation is on behalf of the student and that only the students are their clients. So what are the limits of confidentiality for school counselors? Well, ethically, school counselors are required to take appropriate action if students engage in behavior that presents clear and imminent danger to themselves and others. Legally, they're required to report known or suspected child abuse, neglect, and they're also required to respond to subpoenas and participate in other legal proceedings dictated by the courts. So some things that might come up that might be harmful to the students, you need to be aware of those things. So harm to the student, harm to others, or when it's a legal proceeding, you need to provide information for things like that. School confidentiality. That's being proactive and preventing problems with confidentiality and preparing a student if needed to reveal information. These things are important when working with students. So how can I be proactive and prevent problems with confidentiality? The best way to prevent problems is to provide the student and the parents with information about confidentiality before the school year begins and keep the information visible and available at all times. Post your skills guidelines in various places before the school year begins, in the student handbook, on the counseling department's webpage, or a flyer in your office, or possibly even at just the first meeting between the counselor and each student to make them aware of the processes. So how do I prepare a student if I need to reveal information? So when you do encounter a situation when you need to notify a parent, CPS, your administrator, or someone else, here are some suggestions and things to keep in mind. If you feel it necessary to share confidential information, let the student know ahead of time that you plan to do it and what you plan to say. Sometimes it's easier than you think it will be. If the issue is something borderline, meaning that you might just need to call the parent, but you're not quite sure yet whether or not it's a conversation you need to have, just ask the student, such as, hey, do you mind if I call and talk to one of your parents about that? I have concerns and I'd like to share it with your parents. Sometimes the students don't mind at all and will say, go ahead, it's fine with me, or yeah, whatever. Also, maybe assure the parents from the beginning, whether it's in writing or directly, that you will let them know if their students are in harm's way. Most often, that's what parents really want to know. If you need to reveal information to parents, encourage the student to make the call from your office. You make sure you dial and that you're actually talking with the parent, that they didn't call someone else, and then hand the phone over to that student and put the call on speakerphone so that way you hear what's going on. You need to be present for the call and be there for the student to support them. Or you can meet with the student and the parents together and be there to help provide support that way.
person's privacy and confidentiality. If you work with young people, another duty you have is to protect their privacy and confidentiality. This is an ethical obligation as well as a legal requirement if you or your agency handle a young person's personal information. As a youth worker, you can be faced with many situations where you will have to make a decision as to whether or not to disclose information a client has told you. Knowing what information you can and cannot disclose is important. Consider the following scenario. A young person, Ruby, tells Nathan, her youth worker, that she has moved out of home because she's had a falling out with her parents. She tells Nathan she's now sleeping on a friend's couch. Ruby's mother calls the youth centre and asks to speak to Nathan because she found his phone number written down on a card in Ruby's old room. Ruby's mother tells Nathan she's frantic with worry because she hasn't spoken to Ruby since Ruby left. Ruby's mother says she just wants to know where Ruby is living so she knows she is safe. What should Nathan do? If you work with young people, you may hold personal information about them that is protected by privacy laws. Under privacy laws, personal information can include a young person's name, address, date of birth and gender, things a young person tells you about themselves, things other people tell you about the young person, for example, information contained in a doctor's report, the fact that a young person is or was a client of your agency, things that happen involving the young person at your agency, for example, if they're involved in a fight, things you observe about a young person, for example, their behaviour, your professional judgments or opinions about the young person, physical information like photographs or drawings of the young person, personal information recorded in any form, whether it's in a client file, on paper, on a computer or even stored in your head, is protected by privacy laws. You should only collect personal information about a young person if it's necessary to carrying out the functions or activities of your service. Some personal information is considered particularly sensitive, like a person's race, ethnicity, religion, criminal records, sexuality, or health information. You must not collect that sort of information unless a person consents. Generally speaking, you cannot use or disclose personal information about a young person if it's for a purpose other than carrying out the activities or functions of your service. You must not share that personal information with third parties outside your service unless you have the young person's consent, or the young person would reasonably expect you to use or disclose the information in that way. Other situations where you may be allowed to disclose or share personal information include if you reasonably suspect unlawful activities taking place, or if disclosure is necessary to prevent serious threats to someone's life, health or safety, or if you are required by law. Nathan has personal information about Ruby, which includes where she is living and what Ruby has told him about her living situation. Nathan must take all reasonable steps to keep that information confidential, even from parents or others who might contact him demanding to know this information. Frequently asked questions. When must you destroy records that contain personal information? Your organisation must take all reasonable steps to destroy or de-identify any personal information that's no longer needed. However, you should check first whether your agency or profession has specific time limits on keeping documents, for example, if it's part of a legal service or a health service. If you have personal information which you no longer need, you should shred it instead of simply placing it in the recycling bin. It is important to note that destroying information does not only mean information recorded on paper. Tapes and computer files must also be destroyed. Are photographs of young people covered by privacy laws? It's important to know that personal information includes images as well as words. You should obtain the informed and voluntary consent of the young person before taking their photograph, and again if you want to use it in a newsletter, brochure or website. Consent can be given by the young person verbally, but it's best practice to use a written consent form that is signed and can be kept on file. You must get consent to take or use a photograph of a young person if it's attached or connected with a service that clearly discloses information about the young person's health condition. For example, if the photograph is used for a promotion for a drug counselling service or a mental health support service. Young people of any age can give their own consent if they understand the issues involved. If they do not understand, you should consider getting a parent or guardian to give their consent. If a client requests that photographs of them should not be used in any way, you must take all reasonable steps to respect their wishes and protect their privacy. A young person can also withdraw their consent at any time to have their photographs published in future. If this happens, you must remove the images immediately. You should also be aware that there are some children and young people who should not be identified in any publications, either by photographs or by name. For example, children who are involved in family court proceedings or family violence proceedings, or children who are subject to children's court proceedings in the family division or subject to a protective order of the children's court. Are there situations where I'm allowed to disclose personal information about a young person? The Department of Human Services may require you to disclose information about a young person who is subject to a protection order and comes under state care. There are also special provisions around reporting child abuse or child neglect. For some professionals who work with young people, they are mandated by law to make a report if they have concerns a child is in need of protection from physical injury or sexual abuse in the home. We will be discussing mandatory reporting next.
So you might need a copy of an example of a confidentiality policy. If your group doesn't already have one, they probably do, but just for example, here's one you could look at. So basically the example would be something like a signature sheet so that you could have students sign when they meet with you individually for the first time. A statement could be put on this in the student handbook with a signature line that they would return to you. Or in the guidance office web page, you could have students print out the web page and sign it and bring it in and have access to the parents. You can have them go to the web page and have something where they click to accept that as a guideline policy. Basically, the guideline policy needs to let them know that there's confidentiality for the student and that they can feel safe to come in to see you. What's said here stays here, and with the following exceptions that are required by law and or ethical standards. Anything that pertains to harm to themselves or to others has to be reported. Anything that would pertain to abuse or neglect would need to be reported. And any type of court or other legal proceedings such as subpoenas for student information is also privy. You are allowed, though, with that information, you don't have to tell everything you know about a student. You only have to answer questions that are being asked specific to that court proceeding. And if there's ever a need to reveal information, it's always nice to give students the heads up that you will let them know in advance, if at all possible, and to work with them to handle that situation in such a way that's respectful to the student and their feelings and their needs. So this would be a good example of something you could give a student or provide on your website or have in your office, so students are all aware that where the boundaries of confidentiality and the school counselor lie. Here's a couple of situations, 3 different scenarios that I want you to consider. Which of the following statements is a reason for school counselors to break confidentiality? Statement 1, 2 girls are texting outside of school and escalates to mean words being shared between the two. One of the girls calls the other girl a name and sends an ugly response in a text. Second scenario, a boy visits the counselor for anxiety 3 different times in one day. Third response, a girl comes in upset about how other girls are treating her and talks about wanting to cut herself. The professional school counselor and confidentiality. Pause the video for about 5 minutes to access the link below to read the ASCA article about professional school counselor and confidentiality. This article should help enlighten you on a few more information details. So take a moment and pause and access the link below. Hopefully it didn't take you too long to read the article. The main concepts from the Ask Us article that I was hoping that you would get out of it was that the counselor-student relationship requires trust and confidence. The trusting a counselor is needed by the students for a meaningful dialogue. If they don't trust you, they're not going to come see you again. Students need to be informed of exceptions for confidentiality. They need to know when they're sharing information with you. If they tell you that they're considering self-harm, cutting themselves, or that they're having suicidal tendencies, that when they cross that line, that you need to share that information, but in a safe way so they feel safe expressing feelings like that to you and aren't afraid to hide things that you need to know. Exceptions to confidentiality are to prevent serious or foreseeable harm to the student or others, and if legally required by the law for a subpoena or such thing. It's really important for students to know that if
this is my presentation. You better pay attention. You'll know the law and we'll have a ball and we won't give you detention. Hey! F-E-R-B-A, that's what we say, it's FERPA! FERPA, 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 FERPA! Don't you think twice about giving out students information without parental confirmation. Unless you are a parent or student's guardian, the student must be 18 or you best be stepping. If the student is in danger or a serious troublemaker, those records can be released if inadequacy or court's requester sees F-E-R-B-A, that's what we say, it's FERPA! FERPA, 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 don't you think twice about giving out students information without parental confirmation. Now teachers, don't be fretting and never go forgetting that schools have lost no money and the word is pretty funny. F-E-R-P-A, that's what we say, it's FERPA! FERPA, 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 don't you think twice about giving out student information without parental confirmation. Woo!
So what is FERPA? FERPA is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. The rights with respect to school counseling, how they are the federal law that protects the privacy of students' educational records. It also gives parents certain rights to their child's records until the age of 18. This is the right to review the student's educational records, the right to request school to correct inaccurate or misleading student records, and the right to replace statements to contact info in the records. This can be something as a discipline referral. If a student had a discipline incident and the parent wishes to add a statement to the file and with the discipline record, they have a right to do that. If there's contesting some sort of information on their transcript or a grade, they thought a grade was unfair, parent has a right to place a statement in their file contesting a grade. Up until the age of 18 is all you most know, that when you went off to college, mom and dad couldn't check on your grades anymore. So sometimes in high school we wish that was true as well. Most info on a student's educational records need parent permission before releasing, except for the following: teachers with legit educational need, a new school in which records are being transferred, school official audits, accredited organizations, and judicial order or subpoenas. So when a teacher needs information on a student, such as you've got someone struggling in math class or in your science class, you might need to access records from their before math classes to see, hey, how'd they do in Algebra 1? Were they not successful in geometry? Well, maybe that's why they're not doing okay in pre-cal. So information like that is allowed for teachers to access to help be beneficial for the student. When a student transfers to a new school, their records follow them. Things like that are also important. Accredited organizations, when they're applying for college, that information is available upon the student's validation. They can get that.
What is a disclosure?
Yoo-hoo! Hey there, Holly Mae.
Oh, hi, Wanda.
I've had it up to here with our PTA president who thinks she's so smart. She's in my classroom 5 days a week on some excuse or another, looking over my shoulder, suggesting in her oh-so-helpful way how I can improve as a teacher.
I've seen her around here a lot. I'm glad I don't have any of her children.
You should be glad. The one I have is a hellion who thinks he can get away with anything just because his mom will protect him. I've had to send him to the office 6 times already this semester, and he's just not the genius his mother thinks he is. You could use a little color, honey. He's failing 3 subjects, and we just got his test scores back. He failed math and language arts both. And she wants him recommended for gifted and talented. Huh! There's no way he's going to qualify. He needs remedial classes, not advanced. I told him what I thought about all this, laid it all out in the report card. You know, I ought to show that to you. As a new teacher, you might find it valuable. But I can't show the report card to you because that would violate FERPA. Bye, sweetie.
She already violated FERPA. Woe be unto her. 34 CFR 99.3. Disclosure means to permit access to, or the release, transfer, or communication of personally identifiable information contained in education records to any party by any means, including oral, written, or electronic means. She already told you that the boy has discipline and academic problems. That is a violation of personally identifiable information contained in education records. Bad, bad, bad.
But she never even used the boy's name.
Didn't have to. Everybody around here knows who she's talking about. That's all that matters. I have spoken.
The LPC's confidentiality codes are important too. The law protects the relationship between a client and a psychotherapist, and that information cannot be disclosed without written permission. Exceptions are always there. They include suspected child abuse or dependent adult or elder abuse, for which it's required by law to report this to the appropriate authorities immediately. If a client is threatening serious bodily harm to another person, the police must be notified and the intended victim must be informed. If a client intends harm to himself or herself, the therapist shall make every effort to enlist their cooperation in ensuring the safety. If they do not cooperate, the therapist must take further measures without their permission that are provided to the therapist by law in order to ensure their safety. So, for example, if a client is threatening to hurt someone, like maybe they're threatening to hurt their parents and they share it with their therapist, the therapist must notify the law and the parents of the intended threat that might be a possibility. If a student is threatening self-harm and you need to make a suicide risk prevention and you find out that they are at risk for suicide and you can't take any chances by sending those kids home on the bus, you have to call the parents and find out if there's interventions in place for them to come take the child safely to the emergency room, or if not, you have to call 911 and have them actually come pick up the child and take to the emergency room. You can't take a chance that something could happen to that child on the way home. You've got to ensure their safety for their own benefit. Take 10 minutes, pause the video, and read the attached article with the link below about ethics confidentiality. This is an article about who is responsible for Elizabeth Shen. Take a moment and read it, and we'll discuss after reading. Please pause the video while you access the link.
Hey everybody, how's it going? I am back, and I'm going to touch on some multicultural considerations with regards to confidentiality and privacy. I'll be looking at some statements in the ACA code. I'll talk about group counseling for a bit, the family and social circle, and we'll touch on child rearing. All right, in the ACA Code of Ethics, In the first paragraph, actually, of Section B, they talk about multicultural competency with regards to confidentiality and privacy. So they mention that counselors should communicate conversations about confidentiality in a culturally competent manner. Pretty much just having the conversation about confidentiality is important in itself. I think many clients may not know what that means in a counseling environment, and to reassure them that that it's a safe place for them to share may actually allow them to let their guard down a bit and share some things that they maybe wouldn't share in certain social circles or with family. Secondly, counselors should maintain sensitivity regarding different cultural meanings of confidentiality and privacy. Try not to push your client. I don't think certain clients are going to be open right away. So try to respect that, also recognize that, your competencies and kind of like the limits of your own expertise and try to learn from your client as well. Thirdly, counselors need to respect different views regarding disclosure of information. Similar idea of kind of like keeping an open mind. Also, like I said, like some clients just may not disclose. It may take them a while. You may have to build up to that trust, or maybe because of norms and cultures, you may not see them disclose. Lastly, counselors hold ongoing discussions with clients regarding how information is shared. So touching back on the first one, right, just continuing to have these conversations about confidentiality and privacy. Part of it is about building trust and, building a safe place for the client to kind of share and open up. All right. Okay, so we're going to move on to child rearing. So as we all know, different homes have different forms of discipline, and traditionally some groups tend to have an authoritarian parenting style, and physical punishment may be prevalent. I think when these topics come up, it's important to discuss the limits of confidentiality with a client. Once again, letting them know that, hey, this is a safe space to explore, but also letting them know what the limits of your confidentiality are. I think it's important. This also helps spur an open dialogue with families, so we may better understand the thinking and doing of both ourselves and others. Counselors must consider how to address these issues with parents. So I think it's important to, invite feedback and thoughts, because at the end of the day, it's only through open dialogue and perseverance that happy mediums can be found. Okay, so group counseling. Members in a group counseling session might be unaware they are protected by the concept of confidentiality. It's very important to have, a conversation with your group members about confidentiality and what it means in a group setting. As a facilitator of the group, you need to make sure that members are responsible for ensuring they will not breach confidentiality of another group member. This is all working towards creating a safe and open space for those people in your counseling session. Group members may feel hesitant about speaking on marital and family issues, once again due to cultural norms or just due to family. Certain members may not feel right talking about a spouse or talking about a parent. But rather than that being an obstacle, you should see it as an opportunity to learn more about another person's culture. Lastly, if session confidentiality can be secured, clients' doubts can be reduced and sharing will be encouraged. Well, once again, if you feel like you're in a safe space and people aren't going to be taking what you say in that space out, it will allow you to be more open in that space and explore more safely. Okay, and with family and social circles, what's important to take away here is this idea of consent and how consent is defined kind of in the Western notion of counseling, and which happens to be a mainly individualistic worldview. And you just don't see a lot of alternative constructions of consent. So, there are many people from many varied cultures that, where, in families, you have more than one person giving consent. So ideas of consent, confidentiality, and privacy, they're kind of defined in unambiguous and in conventional ways. And I think that's something that we all have to work on as we're trying to become multicultural competent, is to be open to kind of like other methods of doing things. And this, also connects to ideas of confidentiality and privacy.